The real beginning is Pearl Harbor Day, December 7th,
1941.
The Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor. The U.S. government wanted to strike back at Japan.
4 or 5 months after Pearl Harbor,
U.S. launched a secret mission.
The leader of this raid, known as the Doolittle Tokyo Raiders.
In China, we were building 2 or 3 airports for the John Doolittle's airplane to land. After bombing, Tokyo turned around right away towards the coastline of China. If you cannot make the secret airport on the coastline, give up the airplane and land on the coastline. Chinese guerrilla will come over and help.
16 airplanes that had taken off the aircraft carrier. None of the planes actually made it to the airfield where they were supposed to land.
and all 16 planes
Crash landed. The Chinese guerrillas saved the Doolittle Raiders from the Japanese capture and led them all to safety.
Japanese retaliation incurred onto the Chinese people. Upwards of 250,000 civilians were slaughtered afterwards as a kind of a revenge move that these Chinese had dared to help the Americans.
This is only one of the Doolittle Raiders' story.
Most of those stories are never known by the world or in USA or in China.
Mr. Thomas Liu and Mr. Sheridan Liu are the descendants of Mr. Tung Sheng Liu. Mr. Liu is going to write a book in Chinese to tell their story.
Especially Chinese people know about some of these things that have happened.
Why the U.S. bombed Tokyo at the time? What's the result? Did it help shorten the war? Did it help reduce the tension in China? How did Tung Sheng Liu meet the Doolittle crew?
the Japanese view of the war. They had always thought that their homeland was safe and impregnable.
After the bombing, Japanese realized Japan is not somewhere that nobody can invading Japan. So in that respect, it did help to release the tension in China because they have to move back so many millions of soldiers to defending Japan itself. Probably helps to shorten the war effort.
It compelled them to divert some of their naval resources further east in the Pacific, which prompted them to set up the conditions for the Battle of Midway. In a military sense, it determined the course of the war.
There was a significant psychological advantage that the raid gave to the Americans. They said to the Japanese, see, we can get you right in the middle of your country. In turn, what that led to, the historians believe, is that the Japanese were less confident about deploying their resources over a wide area. They felt they had to hold some back just to protect their borders. The Doolittle raid helped to, depending on how you look at it, helped to shorten the war, helped to save American and Allied lives.
Very profound, actually benefited
U.S. citizens. They learned the same thing, especially in those days. They didn't know very much about Japan. They thought it was this isolated country way across the ocean, and it was a very foreboding thought that we would be attacked by them. Once they're told that, in fact, the U.S. can get in, breach the Japanese defenses, and go in, attack them in their capital city, that was a significant event. Think of the raid as, in some ways, a marketing campaign, a morale-building campaign.
Because of these reasons, the U.S. launched the raid.
In 1941, Pearl Harbor, President Roosevelt, very, very upset after the bombing to find some volunteers to work on this. Because after the bombing, go to China, how many will survive? Nobody knows.
These brave young men, they just went for it with no hesitation at all. They had the opportunity to back out. Knew it was a very dangerous mission. None of them thought so much about their safety. They just wanted to do something positive for their country.
They don't make it to the coastline. They may all die, for sure.
U.S. launched this raid to strike back at Japan very quickly, within a few months, and very hard.
When they start off from San Francisco to Hawaii, all the airplanes on board.
The aircraft carrier.
After Hawaii, after they dealt towards Japan, all of a sudden they find a Japanese fishing boat. And that's a big decision because they're so far away from Japan. And maybe the fishing boat already told the Japanese military, say, there'll be a raid against Japan. So the first thing they did is decide whether they should take off right away or wait until they get closer to Japan. So Doolittle says, we cannot wait, must take off. We don't know for sure whether the fishing boat already sent a message to the Japanese military.
Were able to bomb several cities in Japan in April of 1942. Because they had to launch the raid a little earlier than planned, initial arrangements to land in Chinese air bases had to be scuttled. It didn't work out, and all 16 planes crash landed except for one plane.
One plane, one crew went to Russia.
So there's a big problem because they're too far away from Japan. The fuel will be a major problem. After bombing of Japan, they have no fuel. They have to land it so close to Japan. Jim Doolittle is an aeronautical engineer from MIT. So he told everybody how to save the last few drops of the fuel. After Tokyo bombing, and turn around right away towards the coastline of China.
All 16 bombers dropped their bombs over Tokyo. Then they all headed toward China. Only one headed towards Russia.
Central government did not get the message until 1 day later. So they sent a message to the coastline airport. It was 1 day late. By that time, Jim Doolittle airplane already landed. Such an unfortunate incident is this. Jim Doolittle is a very good aviator. He's the only one who make it to the air, but he cannot land because the airport manager figured out must be the Japanese airplane. So the airport manager turned the lights off, and in the darkness, nobody can see the runway. That's why Jim Doolittle was landed at the rice field, and he was lucky to be survived.
At first, he thought that he had failed because even though they had hit their targets, all the planes had crashed. Basically, they lost all the planes. He was afraid that they had lost many of his men. Later on, he discovered that almost all of them were able to make it to safety.
All the raiders survived the crash and were saved by the Chinese in China and the Russians in Russia, respectively.
The Doolittle Raiders were very appreciative of the efforts that the Chinese made to help them return to safety.
My father's involvement just happened to be a matter of chance. He was just traveling, but apparently the Chinese guerrillas had gotten word that there was someone in town who might be able to speak English. One plane, which was piloted by Travis Hoover, I believe he was a captain at the time, happened to crash land in an area that was close to a town that my father was passing through. I think technically this was Japanese occupied territory, but the sense of it is that the Japanese did not have much of a presence there. The Chinese guerrilla authority found this one crew from the Doolittle raid and basically took their crew under their wing, and I believe they had heard that the Doolittle raid was about to happen and that these American flyers might be appearing. My father said was that he was just in his boarding house. He got a knock on the door. A few fellows, and they asked him if he could speak English, and he said yes. They asked him to come with them. So they took him to a place in the town, and the next thing he knew, 5 American flyers walked in. This was the Doolittle crew. Crew number 2, the pilot was Captain Travis. Basically, they recruited my father to act as a translator between the Chinese guerrillas and this American crew for about 2 weeks as they traveled through backwoods and mountain trail to evacuate them to free China.
Colonel Hoover, who was a pilot of the crew that my father helped, always told people that my father saved his life, that if it weren't for him, he wouldn't be around. And we're close to some of, who I won't say real close, but we've been in touch with some of Colonel Hoover's relatives, and they feel the same way. So they're very appreciative of it.
And what happened to the other raiders?
Some of the crews actually ditched into the ocean. Some were captured by the Japanese, tortured, and actually 3 of them, I believe, were executed by the Japanese.
When Japanese got to the location, they are far behind the Chinese guerrilla, 3-4 hours behind. Find the airplane there, but no U.S. aviator. They ask the people, where are you hiding them? If you don't tell me, I will kill you all. The people rather to die instead of tell them the secret. The Chinese sacrificed 250,000, and we have to remember those things because all those brave people, all that, they died for the country, they died for the justice, without even let the world to know what really happened.
What happened with our father was just one story. There are 80 different stories of these men.
Amongst 80 members of the Doolittle crew, Tung Sheng Liu first met 5 raiders.
My father at the time, in Shanghai, living under Japanese occupation, he had the opportunity to go back to Western China.
They had a plan to evacuate the Americans into the western part of China, not occupied by the Japanese, called Free China.
While he was embarked on this trip, He by himself, my mother did not go with him at the time, embarked on this journey to go back to Western China, to free territory. Probably in the early phase of this trip that he encountered a crew from the Doolittle Raid.
General James Doolittle. He thought that he had failed because all the planes had crashed. Basically, they lost all the planes. He was afraid that they had lost many of his men. Later on, he discovered that almost all of them were able to make it to safety. And he promised them a big party. So these 80 young men got together and had a party and began a tradition, which is now known as the Doolittle Tokyo Raiders Reunion. They did it on the anniversary date of the raid, which was April 18, 1942. I think in 1946 they had their first reunion.
Tung Sheng Liu and his wife came to the United States to pursue their master's degrees. He in aeronautical engineering, she in English literature.
My father had made some attempts to contact with the Doolittle Raiders. He wrote letters to General Doolittle and also to some of the other aviators that he had met. However, he had had no success. And he and my mother were at home in Minneapolis, Minnesota. My father was reading the newspaper. He saw this announcement. It said the Doolittle Raiders will be holding their reunion in Minneapolis at the Roosevelt Hotel. He turned to my mother and said, "Hey, I know these guys." I was there too, although I hadn't popped out. My mother was actually 9 months pregnant with me. I was in her stomach.
My father did come to this country. He was probably the only Chinese who had helped the Raiders who made it to the U.S. after the war. Certainly the only one that we know about. Showed up at this reunion in 1948. He was made an honorary member of their group.
On the date of the reunion, my father dragged my mother, big stomach, over to the hotel. Basically just walked in on the party and found all these Doolittle Raiders that he had met. And he made the determination that he would attend every single Raider reunion that he could. And he made good on that.
He made very good friends among the Raiders. He was especially close to Colonel Hoover, who was the pilot of the plane and the crew that he had helped.
I have been to many of the Raider reunions, and we've met most of the Raiders, come quite close to them. Certainly stand in awe of what they were able to accomplish. We're very proud of our father.
My father was always very proud of his involvement with the Raiders.
All the ones that I've talked to don't think of themselves as heroes. They were there at that time, in that situation. They did what they felt they should do, what was right. That's a good lesson for all of us. And in fact, in addition to the reunions that are held every year, some of the Doolittle Raiders go around the country to various types of events, spreading the word about what it means to be an American, to be a soldier or a flyer, what it means to want to sacrifice for your country. This year
has continued every year until 2013.
Actually, it will be the last public Doolittle Raiders reunion. Even if they'd known this was going to happen, I don't think they would have been any less anxious to meet their mission, because that's who they were. Those soldiers, they were out to accomplish their mission.
We learned that wars are horrible events to be remembered. The point is, always strive to have peace and avoid war.